Hello, everyone. My name is Rico Grant, founder of Palooza Noir, executive director of SoCap Accelerate. It's important that we talk about the theme for today. The theme for today is going to be radical transparency. We'd love for you guys to continue to engage with us via the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it myself. I have two of my friends here to talk about a very, very powerful topic. But we also want you guys to engage. This is a safe place. It's an uncomfortable conversation. We truly understand that. But the reality here is that if we're going to push the needle forward, we have to have a level of radical transparency. And that's what we're looking for you guys. With that moving forward, I'll let my comrades introduce themselves.
All right. Well, I am Sean Ruggles. I am president and founder of the Catalyst Group, a brand strategy, multicultural marketing firm based here in Cincinnati. It's been a really interesting time. I'm glad we're going to have this conversation with regard to what brands are looking at in the context of our consumer shifts they have.
Sure.
So looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So I'm Shweta Pai. I'm the founder, CEO, co-founder and CEO of Organalytics. We are a diversity and inclusion tech startup based here in Cincinnati. It's been a roller coaster for us. When COVID happened, it was just like, I thought for sure we were just dead in the water, with disparate impact.
Sure.
Minorities are last one's hired, first one's fired. Right, and it was just one of those where we were just like, oh, we should pivot. But now the conversations are changing, and it's been heartening.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to this chat and to engage with more people on this topic because it's a topic that means a lot to us, and we're actively working to change it.
Absolutely. So, although you guys are on a fly on the wall today, I continue to encourage you guys to participate in the chat. Regardless of what the camera is, I can see your messages on my cell phone, so I'll continue to watch that. I'm going to open up the conversation with just a general question. How are you guys feeling about the world today and so forth with all that's going on?
Go ahead, Sean.
Well, it's interesting. What I see is community colors are actually at a cross-section of several pandemics happening at the same time. I mean, you've got the health pandemic as it relates to COVID and the health crisis and big disparities, health disparities there. You've got an economic crisis as it relates to joblessness and business challenges. And then you also got this thing called politics and the vote that's going to happen in 3-4 months, right? And so when you think about the average African-American or individual from the communities of color, those disparities are wider than most folks find it. And so I think the big part is just really going to understand is recognize that, on some days it just feels real heavy. On some days, it just feels as if wherever I turn, there's nowhere to go to escape the heaviness of the moment.
Yeah.
But there's other days where I feel as if I believe in the power of one. I believe that if I can influence the positions I sit in, the chairs I sit in, I can make it better for myself and other people. So it's been kind of mixed, right? I'm also starting to see, who's with you and who really wasn't, right?
Right.
And so that's the context in which I'm seeing a lot of African Americans and communities of color kind of going through right now. It's impacting my business, but it's right now it's mixed.
Sure. I'm getting a bunch of nods from Sway over here. So I'm curious to know, your experience, and obviously you agree with Sean on a couple of those things.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to share mine as well. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a different kind of prism that I look at everything, right? Because I'm an immigrant. I came to the U.S. at the age of 12 from India, but I moved to South Dakota. So that feeling of other is definitely something that I'm very familiar with. And it's different from an immigrant perspective, right? Because unlike someone who was born here or whose parents are American, I actively chose this country. I chose this system. And so I have a sense of ownership and accountability, and I want to hold this society accountable in a way, because I believe and I bought into that promise.
Yep.
Right. So, and I was 22 when I became a citizen. So it's it's something that I actively chose. So I feel like it's on me. I believe a lot of times it's that power of one, but it's also that it's very disheartening a lot of times because you're just like, what in the world is happening? This is supposed to be the best country. That's what I signed up for.
Sure. 22 years old when you became a citizen.
22.
You're 25 now. Absolutely. I agree with those thoughts. You hit on something when you said ownership.
Right.
And this is something, quite honestly, I've struggled with. I've struggled with finding my place and what change looks like, to be honest with you. And not only finding the place, but owning that, right?
Yeah.
So let's hit on that ownership piece a little bit, specifically as it relates to the brands that we buy, the world, the business world, the things that exist that we have expectations for in regards to messaging and so forth. And I know, Sean, you've got some thoughts on this.
Let's get back to what we were talking about, right? The power of brands is to try to figure out just how people are thinking so you can resonate.
Sure.
Right. And so what I've seen in the last 30 to 60 days has been brands wanting to make a statement.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody in the world wants to come out and say that we stand with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That statement, when you make a statement, you have to recognize that given the context that we just talked about, right, that in some instances it's heavily felt from an economic standpoint, health standpoint, a voting and politics standpoint, police brutality and social justice standpoint. The context of today's consumers is totally different.
Totally different.
Right? I'm not necessarily focused on just what I use to clean my clothes. I just want my clothes clean,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when brands make a statement, I do think it's a powerful opportunity to create a connection. But we also have to recognize that we're taking note. We're taking note right now in terms of who was with us before this happened, and do you have an authentic position in which to share? Do you have credibility to share with us? We're also looking at whether or not your statement is valid.
Yep.
Right? Are you speaking to something that really matters to me, or are you just speaking?
Yep.
Right. And so I do believe there's two things happening with brands and corporations right now. The first is everybody has to try to maintain a share position in sales with a growing consumer base who's growing in wealth and growing in spending power. Right. But you also got individuals inside the company who are ethnic minorities who are now expecting their company to walk out their values. Right. And so you got the internal push, you got the external push. And I think that puts a little bit more, that might create a new context for how brands really connect with our communities.
Yeah. And I've got the cheat code here a bit because I speak with Shweta and Sean quite a bit. And I know you have some thoughts, and Sean brought up the word authentic.
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like for you?
It's interesting, and this is something that we've talked about quite a bit, and I think on reflection and discussion, the thing that strikes me, and we've talked about the Kaepernick Act by Nike. When Nike put that ad out, I was so impressed that I actually went out and bought their stock. Right? It's because it struck me as authentic. But why? Why was that authentic? I think the key to me there was it was authentic because they trust in Kaepernick. What Nike showed was that they trusted his judgment, that he was doing something because it needed to be done. It wasn't whether they didn't ask him to conform, they didn't ask him to change.
That's good.
It was, so that felt authentic, and I think authentic brands don't ask us, the minorities, to change who we are.
Right.
And I mean, this is also broader to relationships and allies. I think that applies there too. You don't expect us to change. And how many times have we been told to look different, talk different, don't talk with an accent?
Yep.
It's from my end. But when somebody doesn't ask you to do that,
Yep.
that to me strikes a point.
That's really interesting to me. Colin Kaepernick was an athlete who was a part of the Nike family prior to any type of protest that he put out there. He was also a part of the National Football League family. Okay, and that's a very interesting thing to me because, and I love your perspective on this, because the National Football League, as we all know, took a different approach, right, to the Colin Kaepernick situation. So what are your thoughts specifically on that counter approach to what the true matter is?
All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna I'm going to take a risk on technology because we're sitting in a tech place. I'm just going to show a visual of the ad we're talking about.
Okay.
Right? And then I'm going to show a visual of what the NFL's response is. So
Yeah.
just hold on for a second. You see feedback and all of a sudden see me.
Bear with us.
Bear with us.
Bear with us.
Hold on for just a second. Let's see here. That worked a second ago. We won't do it now. All right. So I think the important part is take a look at the headline of what the Kaepernick ad said.
Sure.
And then think about the optics of what's being said right now. The headline for the Kaepernick ad said, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything."
Everything.
Right? And what happened in 2016 in terms of everything that's happening with him around kneeling was really one of the first national discussions that we held on police brutality, particularly of black men, right? And black men was what I said there, right? The NFL had a choice, right? So we're talking about two brands, right? Nike,
Big brands.
Big brands, Nike, and we're talking about the NFL.
Yep.
Same place, same time, same field, same 100 yards.
Yep.
Two different responses.
Yep.
Yep.
Same man.
Same
Leading
guy,
the charge.
right?
Yeah.
So what we have is the issue of police brutality. Nike gets behind Kaepernick and creates this ad in a series of ads that says, "Believe in something, even if it's sacrificing everything." He wasn't about sacrificing your life. This man sacrificed his livelihood,
Literally.
right? But what was interesting is Nike has had a history of doing this for women, for children.
Yep.
And so the clip that I'll put in the chat for people to go look at after the session will be to look at the history of doing this.
Sure.
So by the time they got to make the statement around Kaepernick, they already had a history of showing up and being authentic.
Yep.
The NFL was presented with the same choice. And what they did was they pivoted on patriotism versus social justice, right? And within that pivot, that's when we started seeing all the veteran games and everything else. Not to say that those things aren't important, but what it did do was tune out what society was talking about.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference between product-driven marketing, which is what the NFL was doing to drive sales and sponsorship, and purpose-driven marketing, which is a connection to society.
Sure.
And so now what we see is fast forward, the things that were talked about then are what was being described right now, right? And one brand, Nike, has a lot more brand value because of the fact that they signaled appropriately to their consumer segment and to the world, and they foreshadowed the events that were happening.
Yep.
Now the NFL has then said the same thing. We apologize. But the issue is that while they had the courage to make a statement, their timing and their first approach did not give them as much credibility.
Timing matters.
Timing matters.
Yep.
So that when we start to talk about the question of authenticity, what we're talking about is, are you willing to take the risk to be right?
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're talking about, are we willing to take the risk to be right? That is so huge.
Yep.
Because that's the opportunity that every brand has. And I'm not saying that the NFL is not a great brand. What I'm saying is it's actually one of the best, it's the most recognized brand in the world. And even them, they got hit.
Yep. They took a hit.
Well, it's also, I think, like you pointed out, Nike was very comfortable entering those uncomfortable situations because they have the history. That's what makes it authentic as well, is that they are willing to have that uncomfortable conversation, willing to go there and, like you said, risk being right, but take that risk time and again, over and over.
This just proves that brands have little margin for error, right? And not that this needs to be driven home, but when we talk about the NFL, we're talking about a brand that literally owns a day of the week.
That's right.
Literally owns a day of the week. And if a brand that large can lose face value with consumers, then it speaks to the rest of the brands not having much room for error.
Yeah.
Let's get into I'd like to talk a bit about the allies, right? And we can definitely tie in the brands as well, but I'd like to have a discussion about the allies and what that looks like.
So are you talking about that phone call that we all got about 3 weeks ago?
Exactly.
From everybody saying, "Are you okay? And what can you do?"
Yep.
That ally call?
That's exactly what I mean. Which is a call that I think we're all grateful for,
Mhm.
right? But I do know that we've got some stories behind some of those calls or text messages and so forth. So I'd like to hear your experience behind an ally reaching out to you, if you have one, where you might have questioned, right? Hey, what's the intent behind this, and so forth.
What's huge about this is, and this is where, in preparing for this, we came up with the term radical transparency.
Yep.
And so the ground rules here is, although you're eavesdropping on a conversation with some folks who have some perspective and some insights on what brands need to do, what we're promising to do is be very candid, right?
Yeah.
And so when we start talking about that phone call, what we're talking about is when white individuals call Black individuals or communities of color during that period where everybody's protesting to check in on them, right?
Yep.
So there's two things I would say on that. One is I appreciate the call.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah.
It's great to all of a sudden be in someone else's consideration set.
Sure.
The second part of it is when you reach out, be prepared to reach back. And
Yes.
so what I mean by that is, I got a lot of calls from individuals checking in to see how I'm doing. How's my company? What are we doing? I gave the invitation to do something together.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that I said, the first thing I need you to do is I don't want you to have to feel as if you have to think Black, right? I want you, that would be unfair.
And nearly impossible.
Nearly impossible. I don't want you to have to think about being Black. But what I do want you to do is put on a lens of equity, right? And influence where you sit to just have equitable decisions.
Sure.
That's the one thing everyone can do.
And own that.
And own it.
It goes back to ownership. Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to authenticity, if they only called once, that's also a signal,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? If they only called you once, or where there was an invitation to do something with you, that would probably make a difference. Because I think, so we're close to the situation.
Yeah.
So I think we have a better guidance on what impact might look like. So if someone wants to make an impact, continue to reach out and continue to work through us because we're closest to the issue.
Sure.
So I love the call, right? That call. I'm looking for who calls back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartening. I mean, we've gotten so much more interest in just the D&I tech space as well. So that's definitely, it's appreciated. I think the thing that I have as a leader, and when I look at, people and leaders of color, if you will, the thing that what I want to drive home is the fact that, look, this is we are all looking for, it's time for structural change, right? It's time for something bigger than just acknowledging, and acknowledging is great, but we have so much more to go.
Sure.
And when you have, the thing that I see in a lot of boardrooms or high-level discussions is there's just one seat at the table
Yeah.
for us, right?
And it's a,
And
it's a
it's-
full-blown brawl for that seat.
And exactly, and that's completely unfair.
Yeah.
It's us against each other, and then once one of us somehow claws their way up there, then God forbid we actually try to promote somebody else to come up with us.
Sure.
Then we're accused of nepotism, and I think that's what I want people to realize is that when we are up there, I see it as my duty to not just put that ladder back so someone can come behind me, but to put ladders on either side of me, right? So that there can be more seats at the table with people who are different. And we'll put that ladder up so there, somebody else can have that path up. It's on me, and that culture, that fear of nepotism should be gone. I feel like companies and leaders should know that, hey, if you promote somebody who's of color or who's from a minority group, you should expect them to be, to a certain extent, nepotism. I mean, why isn't it nepotism for a white man to promote a white man? But God forbid I promote a woman, it's...
It seems to have a different filter on it.
Exactly,
Yes.
and I think the companies and leaders should have that expectation that, hey, it's not just one person. This person is going to bring up other people, and we expect that because we don't want to tokenize that person. We want full representation.
I'll be honest with you. I see things all the time, and there are things that that we've all seen that we all wonder, how did this get through? And I think diversity in messaging and getting things right requires, not needs or requires diversity in thought, right? And that only comes with having diversity at the table. So I totally agree with that. Go ahead, John.
So I'm going to say, one of the key questions was for this session was, what do Black people and allies expect brands to do?
Yep.
I think there were two salient points that were made. I want to make sure we do this for our audience. The first piece was be authentic.
Be authentic.
Right? We want brands to be authentic. I love what said is, authentic means for Black folks and for allies, not asking someone to conform.
No.
And so we go back to what the Nike piece represented, which was allowing all the people that they've cast as spokespeople to be authentically them, without asking them to change, and then taking the risk to be right. That's one value. The other piece we're talking about here is that call. And what the second principle would then be is that call is an opportunity, right? And I love what you talked about, which is how can we preach and say that we want diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But then have a different climate and culture when we start to exercise our ability to bring in more people like us to broaden the thinking that you said you wanted, right? And so what we can't do is live in contradiction. Either we want to be inclusive in our mindsets, and we want to take advantage of the broad thinking and the abilities of people, of various people, but we can't do that if we start to then create the pipeline, hold the ladders for people that look like us to be able to do it and have that view and weighted a different way. The third piece we got to get into is recognizing that we are who we are the people we're talking about. And so that's the other piece for brands, is to recognize that everything that we've seen as relates to these statements being made, not going to say everything, but the majority of the push has been an internal push from people of color inside their organization saying we need to do something. I think the key piece that this era is now presenting is the fact that the people who are protesting outside are the very same people who are walking inside your company, advocating for something different. Employees and consumers. Right, and I think before it used to be, because we're having a candid conversation, before it used to be, I see you as different than that. Right, you're the good Black. You're the
that's good. That's good. We can't act like that's not a real thing.
Right. And the reality is that when we leave the building at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we're going to homes and we're going to family traditions and communities that they're seeing as different than us. And so really what we've seen is that for brands and for companies to recognize is the fact that we are the same things and same issues that you're seeing people finally speak out against outside your company are the very same issues that folks that are coming in your company are dealing with every day. Right, and I think the big piece for brands and companies simply is having the insight that we are who we're talking about. And so I think that's a very key piece as it relates to making sure that the walls between what's happening outside your company and inside your organization are actually raised within.
No, exactly. No, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, there's so many times where I've been told, "Oh, you're not one of them," and it's just like, well, okay, then who am I? I'm not one of you either. It's a very I mean, I think there is this sense of identity that you can't have dual identities, and a lot of times minority communities do have historically we've had a dual identity. We do code switch and things like that, and I think the expectation is changing, and that is good to hear, but we need more of that.
But the interesting part is, the organization, have they restructured themselves in a way that they can hear the voices and recognize that they have the embedded insight to be more diverse to the consumer expression sitting right there inside their companies. Right? I look at, we're here talking about Procter & Gamble, looking at the signal, and you think about all of the things that P&G has done over the last several years as relates to corporate stewardship and advertising, right? Going back to Always commercial that was like a girl.
Yep.
You know, it talks about
Yeah.
some stereotypes that on the gender scene.
Yep.
Coming out then with the talk,
Yep.
right? And then coming back with the look, right? And then now coming back with the choice, right? Which is an ally-driven piece. When you really think about that, a lot of that didn't come from just P&G looking externally.
Sure.
The byproduct, that is really the byproduct of being able to harness the authentic insights of the people who have a lived experience inside your company.
Inside your company.
And having the structure in which they can then get that out in a way that resonates with other people.
Yep.
So you're sitting on these hidden strengths.
Yep.
The insight that you're looking for, Eric, is probably just a desk away.
Sure.
But the question is, does your structure invite that input? Or is that structure, have you dismantled anything?
Yep.
Right? And
Right.
so my saying is, you're perfectly designed for the outcome you get.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if we're not getting the outcomes of being authentic and resonating with consumers, and we're not getting the design of being relevant and valuable to our employees, then there's something wrong with our design.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is if you really have that insight to see that these brands that have done it right, or these brands that have a credible presence in the eyes of today's consumer, particularly in this context, the ones who are breaking through, are the ones who are actively able to harness the insights, the feelings, the attitudes, and the voices.
Yep.
This now their systems where they now have a place
Sure.
to be able to then help them with their inside game. Their inside game is helping them with their outside.
Yep. You know, when you say that, I don't love many things about this time period.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I do love, and I think people Blackshaw was on here, and him and I discussed this a few weeks back. We now, the thought used to be that brands move slow. These big companies, these big brands move
Yeah.
slow. And I celebrated, 35 years on the face of the earth about a week ago, and wanted to get myself a new birthday gift. I wanted to go get myself a Chevy Corvette, right?
Yeah.
And realize that it's not going to happen this year. And the reason why is because within 72 hours of being notified, GM were able to shut down their factories and not produce Corvettes and produce ventilators, right? And the fact that we think that companies that large move so slow, yet can move so fast, speaks to how fast they can build a structure to hold the type of things that you were discussing. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out conversation. It just takes action.
Well, it takes you being intentional.
Sure. Intentional.
Yeah.
Are we intentional
Yeah.
about diversity? Are we intentional about resonating with these consumers? Do we really understand and have we designed anything? And I think what you're talking about is, to your point, people are producing PPE that were designed to produce something else.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they intentionally made them move.
Exactly.
No, I mean, I think there's also this, are we also looking at all the cultural norms the right way? And are we really looking to dismantle these norms, right? Because you have things like, it can be simple as, medical journals that only really document the symptoms of a disease for a white person, but if a rash shows up, my rash will not look on my skin the same way it would on someone who's fair. So do you have just a document that will actually talk about that so that we can actually address that and change how people are treated? It's just a simple change can change how change things like healthcare for minorities.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful piece. So I think that the big part is just, one, being authentic.
Yep.
The other part is being insightful. We are who we're talking about. I want to leave some time, but this third piece is about being consistent,
Sure.
Yes.
right?
Consistency is a big part of this.
Yeah, there's a term I heard, which I chuckled at right as we were preparing for the session. It's called synthetic activism.
Okay. You have to break this down for me.
Synthetic activism is activism that is paper thin. It's not real, right? You have to do something, and so you just kind of have a course of action that really is not driving change. So here's the example I'll give you. 2 years ago, there was a brand that everyone knew called Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years ago, 2 African American men went into one of their stores and was arrested, right? Arrested because there was a perception and a bias that they didn't fit into the coffee culture, right? So what Starbucks did was the corporate playbook, right? We're going to admit that something happened, admit that something was wrong, right? And then we're going to invest behind the solution, which was this day of inclusion, right? Which was when they closed their stores down nationwide to then give implicit bias training to everyone. And so if anyone is better prepared and has any insight as it relates to managing racial issues in the future,
it should be Starbucks.
it should be Starbucks. But then we rewind to June 3 weeks ago, in which they came out with a ban of not allowing their employees to wear Black Lives Matter paraphernalia. And so on the surface, you say, okay, well, maybe they're just not wanting to be political. But the prior year, they leaned heavily into pride. They allowed their employees to go into pride marches. They sold pride T-shirts. They sold pride coffee mugs. Yep. And so every store was outfitted in pride. But when we get back to the race issue,
they've had all the tools to be successful with this.
And like I said, if anybody should be able to understand and perceive what is happening, it's that brand.
Yeah.
And so what we're saying about synthetic activism is this. You can make your statement, and you can even invest behind a couple of things. But if you've not modified your structure to detect that when it happens again, and you have an appropriate response, then you've done nothing.
Yep.
Right? You've done nothing. And so that's where the challenge is that their systems failed to detect that this was yet another opportunity in race to be able to position their brand appropriately. And so even though they banned Black Lives Matter paraphernalia to be worn by employees, then the next day they came out and said, it's okay.
Yep.
Right? They said, we're going to do it. And so that's the point about consistency. So
Yeah.
even though they arrived at the right side of the issue eventually, what they said was, we made this investment, we understood what was happening 2 years ago, and when it surfaced again, it fell apart.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
I mean, we've talked about this. Like,
Mhm.
how did they get this wrong?
Yeah.
You know, and it also goes to show that the corporate playbook isn't right.
Right.
We need to change that. I mean, and we don't have too much time, so I just want to end with, what is who did do it right?
Yeah,
Who
and,
did
and,
change?
and not only
Yes.
that, but I'd like to hear from both of you who've worked for large corporate brands, but also have that small startup experience as well. Because not only do we have the large corporate heads on with us today, but we've also got some folks with entrepreneurial mindsets, right? And we can't exclude the fact that not just big brands, but all brands kind of have to get it right. So in an ideal world, what type of messaging, what type of intent, what type of authentic would you like to see, Sean?
I think the first piece is recognition that this is everyone's issue.
Yeah.
If you're a startup founder, if you are a corporation that invests, if you are an investor, or you're a brand, you're not immune from this. And here's why. There's a greater expectation that everyone should take a position of take the risk of being right on this issue of race in America. And so, although you may be a startup and you don't have that many employees, you may be sitting across the table from a diverse investor that has this principle and wants to see the right thing because they're using their seat to get it done. You might be selling in your supply chain to a corporation who has the expectation and has taken a corporate pivot to look at all their relationships and make sure they yield a benefit. Right? Or you just may have a colleague or two. So the first piece is whether you're a startup, whether you're a brand, or whether you're a corporation, this touches you. You can't walk away from it. So now the question about authenticity is, have you dismantled anything to allow yourself to be empowered?
Yep.
Right? Have you modified your system? Have you modified your structure? Have you opened up in any way that allows you to demonstrate, not just say, allows you to demonstrate the insights that we're talking about, right? And so I think those are the big things for me with startups in tech and investment. Wherever you sit, what is coming and what is here is that I want to work with people who take the risk of being right. And startup folks take risks every single day.
Sure.
So we have the energy, we have the vigor to be able to really master this. The question will be, will we?
Yeah.
That's good.
No, I mean, I second that, and I also think that, to me, what success would look like is if we see the type of change in every industry, the level of change that we saw in Broadway shows after Hamilton.
Yeah.
Right? That to me that's the type of structural dismantling of norms that I think we have to work towards. And that's what I want companies, large companies, small companies, whatever, to work towards. What are those norms that you can break? I mean, because let's be honest, 10, 15 years ago, if you told me that was even going to be a show that was not off Broadway, I would have laughed at you, right? I would have it would have been just a joke, but it changed the way that you perceive how people are valued and how people are seen. And now you can have a legitimate Black man who can be the lead actor of any show. Race no longer matters.
And
That's
well.
the level. And do it well. Well, now it is about whether he or she can carry that role. It's no longer about whether you look the role. It's no longer about that race. It's in a minority, and so that's what I'm looking for is that level of dismantling, that level of questioning the norm.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go back to what you said in our pre-meeting, which was Hamilton changed Broadway.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
The simple statement is, you got this classical platform, right, that has this infused in urban culture.
Yes.
That changed. I mean, what you shared and what you're sharing now is magnificent, and the magnitude of that instance in terms of changing that structure changed Broadway forever.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So we got about 5 minutes left, and I didn't see many questions on there. I know Catherine is helping us ping folks, but with that being said, it leaves us time to discuss what I feel like is a big issue.
Here's a question.
Okay, 1 second. And what do you guys think about the brands that take the approach of not saying anything at all? And then I promise we'll get to that question. So let's do a minute and then get to that question and target that as we wrap up.
I mean, to me that it's a lost opportunity. To me, that's opportunity cost. You are because it's never about whether you agree or not. It's about engaging in a discussion. And when somebody doesn't engage, you've just lost the opportunity on where you could have gone, where that knowledge could have taken you as a company. And it's just, to me, it's unfortunate. If you don't talk about it, it's unfortunate. And I think because of my background, I talk about this constantly, and the people who fidget, who change the topic, are the ones that it's unfortunate. I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with you about the opportunity.
Yeah.
My thinking is, somebody just put in the chat room, which is your silence is your complicity. You're
Yeah.
lying.
Yeah.
And what
I
you're
love
saying
that.
is that because I have no position on this, I'm okay with whatever is going on. And I think that what ends up happening, the opportunity that people are missing in that is simple. The opportunity is that in order to sell a product or position your brand, you're going to have to resonate with the values and beliefs of the people you're trying to sell to. And so while you may not do it, others will. And so to your point about silence is 2 things. One, that you may be complying with what's going on and you're fine with it, which will contradict the current belief system of your consumers. The second piece is other people are going to do it, so your build is going to be much slower. You're going to be less credible when you arrive. That was the difference between Nike and the Kaepernick ad in the NFL. Nike had been saying this thing for 2 years before the NFL made their statement and said, "We think Black Lives Matter," right? And so to your point about silence, the NFL is silent on the issue of social justice, and shows patriotism.
Yeah, they tried to pivot.
They tried to pivot, and now that they're pivoting back, it's costing them more money, it's costing them more time, and the brand value is low. So the Social Justice Fund was originally $10 million a year that they were trying to find causes. As a result of what happened within the last 2 months, that fund is now increased to over $50 million. So really think about what their investment did. They now have to invest 5 times more than what they did
for being reactive.
For being reactive versus proactive. Right? And so silence is your enemy in the context of
Sure.
people who want you to have an expectation.
Sure.
And
Let's get to that
engagement
question.
is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What was the question, Sean?
I think it was about silence.
Okay.
The piece was, and someone else, this was a statement, but I think we can talk about it. It says there are some companies that are saying they want to be diverse but don't have one minority in the C-suite.
Yeah.
You cannot be diverse if leadership is not diverse. I think that's something we should.
Even look at Apple. I forget. I looked at it maybe a few months ago, but it was there. When you look at their workforce, they're 40 to 50%, Asian, right? But at their C-suite level, there's one.
Yep.
It's shocking, and it's just like, what is going on? How are you not promoting your own? I mean, at this point, it's like, what is, why is that the norm, or why is that even expected?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's to your point about an opportunity. I think it's a missed opportunity. And the reason is two things. One, corporate structures are built to mentor and pull people up. So when you think about it, it's a pyramid. You got more people at the bottom of the pyramid, less people at the top. So if you are going to be a company of the future, right, the people at the top don't have the reach, so they got to find individuals. And so if you're less diverse, your pyramid is never changed. The second piece goes back to what you said around we are who we're talking about. If we're sitting there saying our value is diversity and inclusion, but yet we haven't demonstrated that by having a career path to have more C-suite people, that's a signal to the rest of your town. Right? And the third piece is you got to be in a position to set policy. What we're dealing with right now is a lack of policy and intent. And so if we have people that have greater insight on what's happening, you get better policy. And so you're at a deficit at this particular point if you do not have leadership at the top making this happen.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we're wrapping up. We got about 30 seconds left. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Shweta, for your insight. Hope you guys got something out of it. Thanks for participating and engaging in a way that you have. Enjoy the rest of the Signal Conference, and we hope to hear from you guys soon. Thank you.